This is a Rutke Mods video. Hello, I'm Greg Rutke of Rutke Mods, and welcome to this episode where I introduce my parts PC that I am building for my mother. This is going to be a birthday present for her whenever I go back down and see her. Now, her system was originally my father's old editing PC, very old editing PC. Her motherboard in that system had a problem with freezing. In fact, this was a very common problem with that type of motherboard. That motherboard was the most advanced 775 motherboard I think ever made. It supported all 775 CPUs ever made, plus I believe all 771s with the mod. It was the XFX NVIDIA 790i Ultra SLI motherboard, which was the very first motherboard to ever support three-way SLI and one of the very first motherboards to support DDR3 memory, and even supported overclocking the DDR3 to 2000 megahertz, or a little more, I can't remember right offhand. That system was pretty good at the time when I gave it to her, and it was way overkill then for her, and still is today. But it's been giving her headaches since roughly a month after I gave it to her. I did minor upgrades on it. I made sure it ran right. Well, it stopped working correctly shortly after I gave it to her. And this is where those problems come in with that motherboard. That motherboard had a problem with freezing. When it sat and idled for a long time, when you'd come back, Windows would be totally frozen. Sometimes when you were using it, it would just eventually freeze up. It has nothing to do with the Windows install or any of the other hardware in the system. It has been determined that it had to be the motherboard, and looking it up, it is the motherboard. It's a very common problem, which could possibly be fixed with just upping the voltage on the board through the BIOS. But I'd rather not go through the hassle of it. She also had my old GTX 470 in that system, which was an EVGA card. It was a very good performer. It worked great for years, but it finally got too hot and nuked itself. I'd done preventative maintenance on it multiple times, making sure it was clean, replacing the thermal paste, making sure it had a nice fan curve on it. But it's a Fermi-based card. They always ran hot, they ran loud, and hers just finally gave up about a month ago. It started showing green artifacting, and a few days later, it just stopped working. So she needs a new computer, at least a new video card. And originally I was going to buy her just a new video card, and then I remembered that 790i Ultra SLI motherboard also had another problem. It didn't support newer UEFI supported cards. The most recent card that I believe it supported was from the 600 series. There was apparently workarounds, but I never could figure out anyone who did it successfully and actually told that they did it. They showed that they did it, but I never had proof. So buying her a new video card was out of the question, because I wasn't about to buy her a 600 series where I knew that that would be the furthest she could go. This motherboard will support all video cards ever made basically so far. So this was what I went with. And so she had that. Now let's go into further detail in a second about this. I'll tell you many other neat things about this board and a lot of the painful process of making it work properly. First off, I'll start the system up for you guys. Now this is a Workstation motherboard. It's designed that when it finds faults like things not connected or not working properly, it won't let you boot up until it tells you that there's a problem. I think there's a bypass for this, but I'm not sure yet. And I really don't want to do the hassle of doing it right now until I figure out if, when I plug it into her system, if it will still be giving me that problem. If that's the case, I'll do what I can to bypass it. But right now it's not a problem. Hopefully when I connect everything up to the board in her system, this won't show up anymore. But if it does, I'll fix it then. So once this message pops up, we just hit F1 for boot. And it starts booting into Windows 8. Now let's talk about this board. What do we have on it and what is being upgraded in her system? Now her system is running a Core 2 Quad Q9650 in it, which was the second best 1300 megahertz bus 775 CPU you could buy. There was also the 9700 series, which was the 1600 megahertz bus CPU, but even though it worked in that board, it didn't have it. Now the only one that was above it was the QX, the Extreme Edition version, and that was the one that was easily overclocked. This one you had to do a base clock on to overclock. But still, I'm getting off topic. Her original system had the Q9650 in it. This new system has a i5-2400 Sandy Bridge CPU. I went with Sandy Bridge because it's only roughly 20% slower than the Skylake 6400 i5. And in the grand scheme of things, 20% is not a whole lot, and this thing's still a screamer. Plus, the price was right on this CPU. The motherboard came from a HP Z210 workstation, which, even though this whole board and CPU architecture and stuff are 5 years old, this motherboard is from a very reliable system. These systems were a lot more reliable than the consumer-grade boards, and this should last her at least another 10 years. She uses her systems for a long time when they actually run long. Before her current desktop, she was using an old HP laptop with a, I believe, 1280 by 1024 resolution screen. It had a Pentium 4 in it and 512 megs of RAM. And she used that up until, I want to say, I gave her that computer in 2013 or 14. So she uses systems for a very long time and gets a lot of use out of them before they just get too old and slow. Anyway, so getting back to this, I'm upgrading her video card from my old GTX 470 to this new GTX 750 Ti SC. This card is a lot more efficient, can compute a lot better. It's roughly a little bit faster, I believe, than the 470. It runs a lot cooler, and it doesn't need an external power connector like that card she had did. In fact, I think that card used two 6-pin connectors. This uses none. It's all powered off of the 75 watts of the PCIe port. So it's more efficient, quieter, and whatnot. Now the power supply, this is where it starts getting interesting. I decided to buy her an EVGA 400 watt PSU. It's the cheapest one EVGA sells. I got it used for roughly $20. This right here is a power converter cable. Now the HP board only uses an 18-pin power connector, where of course a regular power supply has a 20 or 24-pin power connector, which means that you can only use HP's power supplies. And when they were new, they cost a few $100 to replace. Now you can get them used for about $60 if you're lucky. Some of them go for still around $100. I've only seen 160, that's why I said that, but they hover around $80 to $100 and sometimes more. So to use a consumer grade power supply, you need this converter cable right here. So 18-pin power supply cable connection. That's the first sign of how much of a pain it has been to get this thing to work. Now, altogether, I saved maybe $100, maybe a little bit more, buying a proprietary motherboard. Like I said earlier, this is a HP Workstation motherboard. It uses a lot of proprietary HP-only parts. This motherboard would have sat in a case where it would be screwed into the back plane. The heatsink would even have been screwed into the back plane, like a regular server heatsink would be screwed into the back plane. But HP likes being even more proprietary than just a regular server. This system has a lot of proprietary parts on it that makes you want to pull your hair out. Was it worth doing it? Yes, I think it was. But was it fun? Well, it's whatever your definition of fun is. I enjoyed tinkering around with it to make it work, but it wasn't easy and it was a little complicated. First off, we'll talk about the CPU socket here. If you notice, the heatsink is zip tied onto the board. This is because even though this is an LGA 155 socket and uses an LGA 155 CPU and has a 155 heatsink on it, aka the 156, 55, 50, and 51 socket heatsinks are all the same. This is actually, I think, a 50 or 51, but it's still the same heatsink. If you notice, it doesn't fit. And this is because it used a proprietary HP-only server heatsink, which means the holes in the board don't come anywhere near the mounting points on the heatsink itself. So I had to zip tie it down. And I've already tested this sucker, and it works totally fine. It's got perfect contact on it. It's nice and flush to the CPU. And it cools exactly the way it is supposed to, but I had to zip tie it on. Now's the second problem on this board. The third problem, no I/O shield whatsoever. Now I got around this pretty easily, considering. See, HP's motherboard tray has, or case, I'm not totally sure which because I haven't seen the actual workstation. I just know it's integrated into one of them. It has the I/O shield built into either one of those two. So the motherboard doesn't come with an I/O shield whatsoever. So how did I fix that? I started with a piece of paper laid over the I/O to make this template right here. And then I taped this template onto a piece of cardboard and colored in the holes on the template onto the back of this piece of cardboard. Now if you notice, I had to cut rectangles because I figured out cardboard doesn't cut in small squares very nicely. So here's the finished product right here. It's not pretty, but it fits perfectly on there. It's screwed down by the screws on the DVI port, and it will keep the dust out and anything that would want to crawl into the computer. So it will work. Plus, unlike what my mother may think, it's not going to catch on fire. No way, no how. It's going to be totally fine, which I'll have to explain to her that again probably. But anyway, getting back to the point. Now's the other headache. The last major headache wasn't actually that major of a headache after I figured out what I was looking at. Now, if you noticed in the boot up screen with that error with things not connected, it said it was missing the case fan. Well, I kept looking around for a connector for the case fan that looked like a regular fan header. There isn't one. There's one right here that says hood sense. That is not actually a fan connector. It's some kind of sensor connector. Plugging a fan into it will not do anything. So I looked it up online and figured out that this board uses a proprietary server fan connector right here, which is actually just a regular PWM connector. The only difference between this and a regular PWM connector is this piece of plastic right here is longer. Instead of looking like this connector right here, it looks like this. Now, this will still fit any regular fan, PWM or not, by just pulling back this tab a bit and plugging it in. The 3-pin can go here, and the PWM can go here. And that's it. So even though this board's extremely painfully proprietary in some areas, it still can use all the regular parts. Also, I want to quickly address that even though this board is Sandy Bridge, which was the last system to support PCIe 2. PCIe 2 still will not bottleneck a new video card. Bottlenecking would occur in the CPU long before the PCIe bus has anything to do with it, so far anyway. So even though it's 2.0, it's still plenty enough power. Also, I chose this board because it's upgradable by a lot. Even though it doesn't have USB 3 in it, I have a USB 3 card I can plug into it and get full speeds. It's got 2 SATA 3 connectors and 4 SATA 2 connectors, which is great for expandability. And if I ever need more connectors, I can plug a PCIe SATA 3 card in there too. It also has backwards PCI compatibility, though of course we probably won't be using those. And who really uses PCI anymore? But it's also got serial connection if you need that. I don't. She doesn't. But still, it's got that. And a few other interesting things. And the neat thing about the LGA155 socket is this system, even though right now it's running a Sandy Bridge 2400 in it, it can run any LGA155 i7 chip or Xeon chip. This includes any Ivy Bridge CPU also. But I decided to go with this CPU because it was the cheapest performance per dollar I could get. So I'm happy with it, and she will be too. Like I said, this system's major overkill for her. She mostly web surfs and plays online flash-based games and stuff. She doesn't do much else with the system. So it is overkill, but it will make her happy. And this system will last her probably another 10 years or more. And this is where I'm wrapping everything up. Now, this is going to be a short series possibly. I'm not totally sure yet. This board is going to be at least one other episode, maybe, where I install it into her case. I'm not sure if I'm going to film that yet, but I think I will. And this board's also going to be the basis for my next project video, where I show you how to upgrade Windows 7 or 8.1 to Windows 10 for free past the free date. Just like in the video I covered back in early August. This time I'm going to actually show you how to do it, because I want to make sure that this board is activated and set up for her, and I don't want to buy a Windows 10 key, but I have a legit copy of Windows 8, so we'll be upgrading it. And then I'll be upgrading her Windows 7 install to Windows 10. Now, why would I do Windows 10 on this first? This is because her Windows 7 install, even though it is totally legal and legit, it's running an expired volume license key from my dad's old business. The key was still good until midway through last year when it expired. So all systems that were activated with it are still activated, but any other system in the future that would try to be activated on it can't be activated. And I've not upgraded any systems that have that key on it, but I would assume that when it gets upgraded, it will deactivate Windows 10. Now, if I already have this board upgraded to Windows 10 and activated, when I upgrade her install to Windows 10, it should automatically activate on this board, which means there won't be any headaches. In fact, I am probably going to just do a disk upgrade on that system, but I'm not totally sure yet. I just know that once that is plugged into this board, it should be all fine. Her SSD should be very happy on this system, and so I'm looking forward to surprising her with it. Anyway, so that is the end of this episode. Thank you for watching. This has been a Rutke Mods video. Into either one of those two. So the motherboard doesn't come with an I/O shield whatsoever. So how did I fix that? I started with a where did it go?